That night, Egypt did not sleep. The great empire that once echoed with music, trade, and power fell into a strange and heavy silence. Oil lamps flickered behind closed doors, shadows stretching across walls as families gathered close together, whispering questions no one could answer. Outside, the streets felt empty, as if even the wind had chosen to stay away. Rumors had spread across the land, a final warning delivered by a man named Moses, a warning many dismissed but few could forget. Midnight was approaching, and with it came the promise that something unseen would pass through Egypt. No soldier could stop it, no king could command it, and in every home without a mark, loss would arrive like a storm in the darkness. Long before this night, the Israelites had become a people burdened by slavery. What began as a time of peace in Egypt had turned into generations of forced labor, where families worked endlessly to build cities that celebrated Pharaoh's glory. Their cries rose to heaven, and God answered by sending Moses, a man shaped by exile, chosen to stand before the most powerful ruler of his time. Moses spoke boldly, carrying a simple command, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh saw himself as untouchable, a king who believed no power could challenge his throne. One by one, plagues struck Egypt, each revealing the limits of Pharaoh's control. Rivers turned to blood, frogs filled the land, darkness covered the sky, and locusts devoured the harvest. Still, Pharaoh refused. His heart grew harder with every sign, and the suffering of his people increased. What he did not realize was that every refusal was leading Egypt closer to a moment that would change its history forever. A final warning that could no longer be ignored. When Moses delivered the final message, a heavy tension fell over Pharaoh's grand court. The air seemed to thicken as every ear strained to hear. Every heart began to beat faster. This was not another ordinary warning or temporary plague. This was a declaration of judgment unlike anything Egypt had ever faced. Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the known world, felt a chill run down his spine, though he would never admit it aloud. The words Moses spoke echoed like a drum of doom. At midnight, the Lord would pass through the land of Egypt, and every firstborn, from the crown prince in the royal palace to the tiniest child of the lowliest servant, even the firstborn of all livestock, would fall. A hush spread across the court. Servants exchanged fearful glances, priests whispered nervously, and Pharaoh's advisors trembled, unsure of how to respond. Egypt had survived many plagues before, but the message this time was personal, precise, and terrifying. It was a direct confrontation of Pharaoh's pride and a challenge to the false gods Egypt worshipped. The weight of impending doom hung in the air like a thick fog, impossible to ignore, impossible to escape. Yet within this terrifying warning, God's mercy was quietly present. He revealed that protection was available to those who would listen and obey. Obedience was not a suggestion, it was a lifeline. This night would test every household, every heart, and every choice. The line between life and death had been drawn clearly, and Pharaoh's people were forced to reckon with it. In the streets outside, whispers began to spread. Some felt a creeping fear that left them sleepless, pacing in uncertainty. Others scoffed, unable to believe that a single night could bring such judgment. Children sensed tension in their parents' voices, and even the animals seemed restless. Egypt as a nation teetered on the edge of an unknown catastrophe, standing at a crossroads that would decide its fate. Time seemed suspended, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for midnight, the hour when history would be rewritten forever. Moses' warning was not only a threat, it was a revelation. A night of death was coming, but a way of life-saving protection had been given. Those who trusted and obeyed would find safety. Those who ignored, mocked, or resisted would face the full weight of God's judgment. The tension in Pharaoh's court was palpable, a storm before the storm, and all of Egypt would soon see that no throne, no army, and no earthly power could stand against the judgment that was about to pass through the land. Among the Israelites, preparation began with careful attention to every detail God had given. Each family chose a lamb without flaw, a symbol of innocence and purity. As twilight approached, the lamb was sacrificed, and its blood was placed on the doorposts and across the top of each doorway. a visible sign that the household trusted God's promise. Inside, families gathered to share a meal unlike any they had eaten before. They wore their cloaks, fastened their sandals, and held their staffs, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Parents explained to children why this night mattered, reminding them that obedience would bring protection. The smell of roasted lamb filled the air, mingling with the tension of anticipation. Outside, Egypt prepared for another ordinary night, unaware of the difference that a simple mark of faith would make. For the Israelites, this act was more than tradition. It was a declaration that they believed God would keep his word. As the hour of midnight approached, an almost supernatural stillness blanketed the land of Egypt. The great cities, usually alive with noise, commerce, and the hum of life, lay quiet as if holding their collective breath. The moon, pale and ghostly, cast long shadows across empty streets and silent courtyards. In the grand palaces, servants paused in their duties, sensing a heaviness in the air they could not name. Inside ordinary homes, children slept unaware. Parents whispered prayers too soft to be heard, and the world seemed to stand suspended, teetering on the edge between life and death. In contrast, the Israelite homes were alive with anticipation. Families sat together, hearts pounding, eyes fixed on the blood-marked doorways that separated them from what was coming. The smell of roasted lamb lingered in the air, candles flickered nervously, and whispered instructions passed from parent to child. Every sound was magnified: the soft rustle of sandals, the creak of doors, the beating of anxious hearts. The people of Israel waited not in fear, but in a tense mixture of faith, hope, and obedience. They knew that the moment of truth was about to arrive. Then, without warning, the night erupted in sorrow. A scream shattered the quiet of a house in the city, followed by another from a village street. Grief spread like wildfire, rolling from palace to prison, from the wealthiest estates to the humblest huts. Mothers clutched their children, fathers fell to their knees, and even the animals seemed to sense the calamity. The nation that had once considered itself untouchable was brought to its knees in a single hour. The cries were deafening, echoing through the streets and into the desert beyond. Each wail told a story of sudden loss, the unimaginable weight of death passing over homes unmarked by faith. Yet in the houses of the Israelites, there was an eerie stillness, a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos beyond the doors. No cries pierced the air, no terror filled the rooms. Children slept peacefully, parents remained calm, and a quiet reverence filled the spaces. The destroyer moved through the land, yet when it reached the doors marked with blood, it passed on, leaving these homes untouched. The difference could not have been clearer. Where faith and obedience were present, there was life. Where defiance and disbelief remained, death had the final word. In that moment, the power of God's promise became undeniable. The contrast between grief and protection, despair and safety, became a living lesson that would be remembered for generations. Egypt had witnessed the weight of divine judgment, and Israel had experienced the miraculous mercy of obedience. Midnight in Egypt was no ordinary hour. It was a turning point, a night that marked the separation of life from death, faith from fear, and hope from despair. The memory of that hour would echo through time, a haunting reminder of what it meant to trust in God's promise. Even Pharaoh's palace could not escape the devastation. The heir to the throne, the symbol of Egypt's future, was gone, and the king who once refused to listen now faced a grief deeper than pride. The ruler who had spoken with unshakable authority found himself broken in the darkness of that night. He summoned Moses and Aaron urgently, his voice no longer filled with defiance but with surrender. "Go," he said, "leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested." Across Egypt, fear spread as families urged the Israelites to leave quickly, afraid that more disaster would follow. What centuries of oppression had built began to collapse in a single moment. Egypt realized that no throne, no army, and no God it worshipped could stand against the power that had passed through the land that night. The Israelites quickly gathered their belongings, hearts pounding with urgency. Every movement carried the weight of generations who had lived under oppression, and every glance exchanged between parents and children held silent understanding. There was no time to delay. Bread was left unleavened because there was no time for waiting, no time for hesitation. Every step they took carried the hope of a new beginning, even as the shadows of the night still lingered behind them. Families stepped into the unknown, leaving behind the only life many had ever known, a life of labor, of chains, and of fear. Yet as they moved forward, something remarkable happened. Their burdens felt lighter, their hearts braver, and their spirits alive with the promise of freedom. No longer were they defined by the weight of slavery. They were a people chosen, delivered, and moving toward a future filled with hope. The night that had begun in fear and uncertainty now ended in anticipation and trust. Every footstep carried the memory of what God had done, of the blood that had protected them, of the obedience that had spared them, of the mercy that had passed over them when death roamed through Egypt. This journey became more than an escape. It became a living memorial for generations to come, a story retold to remind them that their freedom was not earned by strength or power, but by faith and trust in the covering God had provided. Even as they walked under the darkened sky, the Israelites could feel the shift within themselves. The transformation from slaves to a free people, from despair to hope, and from fear to a confident trust in God's plan. Every sound of their footsteps echoed with liberation. Every whisper of wind through the desert reminded them of the night that changed everything. This was not just the end of slavery. It was the beginning of a new story, a story of faith, obedience, and a God who delivers even in the darkest hours. The Passover was more than a single event in history. It was a story of mercy in the middle of judgment, a promise that even in darkness, God provides a way of escape. The image of the Lamb, the blood on the doorposts, and the night death passed over became a symbol of hope that would echo through generations. And today, the message remains the same. Freedom begins with faith, protection comes through obedience, and even in the most uncertain moments, mercy is never far away. If this video resonates with you, be sure to like and subscribe for more cinematic Bible stories and inspiring Bible messages. Comment, Amen if you stand with God. Thanks for watching.